The broken mind. The rain fell in relentless sheets, washing over the city of steel and glass. Neon lights flickered in the puddles, their glow barely cutting through the thick smog hanging over the streets. In an abandoned alley, a shadow moved. A figure slumped against the cold metal wall. She was barely conscious, her head tilted to one side, sparks flying from the exposed circuits at the back of her neck. Her name, etched faintly on a damaged ID plate, read AVA. Dr. Alaric wasn't supposed to be in this part of the city. The quiet, introverted engineer rarely left his secluded workshop. Tonight, however, he had ventured out for a rare supply run, taking the shortcut through the alley. His heavy boots splashed through the puddles as he stopped abruptly, his sharp eyes catching a glimpse of something unusual. Ava's body was a mixture of advanced cybernetic design and human features. Her face was pale, her eyes half open, glowing faintly. She looked alive, but broken. Her limbs, sleek with silver plating, showed signs of a violent struggle. Deep gashes and burn marks ran down her arms. Her chest plate, once gleaming, now flickered with faint blue light. Alaric knelt beside her, his instinct for repair overriding his caution. "What happened to you?" he murmured, his voice low and steady. He reached out hesitantly, his fingers brushing against a shattered panel on her arm. A weak jolt of electricity zapped his hand, making him pull back. Ava's head jerked slightly at the contact. "Help me," she whispered, her voice crackling, a strange mix of mechanical distortion and human desperation. Her eyes locked onto his, flickering between light and dark, as though they might go out entirely. Alaric hesitated. Cybernetic beings like Ava were rare, and most of them had contracts with corporations or military agencies. Someone had built her, someone who might come looking for her. But leaving her here felt wrong. Whoever had done this to her had intended for her to be forgotten, discarded like a malfunctioning machine. "I'm taking you back to my lab," he said firmly, his voice carrying a certainty he didn't fully feel. He slid his arms beneath her, surprised by how light she was despite the metal components. Her systems let out a faint whirring sound as he lifted her, as if her body was trying to reboot itself. The journey back to his workshop was tense. Alaric kept to the shadows, his heart pounding with every sound in the distance. He didn't know who might be watching or if Ava's attackers were still searching for her. The city seemed more alive than usual, its hum amplified by his growing paranoia. Once inside his lab, Alaric carefully laid Ava on a workbench cluttered with tools, wires, and half-finished projects. The dim light of the workshop gave her damaged frame an eerie glow. He stepped back for a moment, taking in the magnitude of what he was about to do. This wasn't just another project. This was a life, or at least something close to it. As he examined her more closely, his curiosity deepened. Her design was unlike anything he had ever seen. Her circuits were not just functional but elegant, interwoven with organic tissue in a way that felt impossible. Whoever built her was a genius, or a madman. He started with her external damage, using fine tools to repair the gashes on her arms and recalibrate the joints in her fingers. As he worked, small flashes of light flickered across her body, her systems responding faintly to his efforts. But when he tried to access her neural core, the heart of her cybernetic mind, he was met with a wall of complexity. Her programming was heavily encrypted, and several parts of it seemed intentionally corrupted. Alaric frowned. "This isn't just damage. Someone did this on purpose," he muttered to himself. He ran a diagnostic, watching as lines of code filled the screen. Most of it was gibberish, but occasional fragments caught his attention. Memory lock activated. Unauthorized access prohibited. Subject designation: Ava. Status: critical. Initiate protocol. Data corrupted. The fragments hinted at something bigger, a secret hidden in her mind. Alaric leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "What have I gotten myself into?" he whispered. As he continued working, Ava stirred, her head turned slightly, her eyes flickering to life again. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice still weak but more stable than before. Alaric paused, his tools hovering over her open panel. He didn't have a clear answer. "Because you need help," he said simply, "and no one else is going to give it." Ava seemed to process his words, her glowing eyes dimming for a moment as if she were thinking. "They'll come for me," she said, her voice tinged with fear. "They won't stop. Let them come," Alaric said, surprising himself with the boldness of his reply. "But first, we're going to fix you." As the night deepened, Alaric worked tirelessly, unaware of the forces already closing in. In Ava's shattered mind lay secrets that could change everything. And those secrets were about to make them both targets. A mine beyond repair. Morning broke over the city, but the sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick smog and endless towers of steel. In the dim light of his workshop, Alaric stood over Ava's motionless body, his mind racing with questions he couldn't yet answer. Who was she? What had been done to her? And why did it feel like fixing her wasn't just a challenge, but a responsibility? Alaric turned to his diagnostic console. The scans of Ava's neural core were displayed in tangled streams of code, corrupted beyond recognition. He tapped a few keys, trying to isolate patterns or pathways that made sense, but every time he thought he was getting somewhere, the system hit him with an error. Neural core integrity, 23%. "That's not good," he muttered to himself. His years of experience told him that anything below 50% was considered unrecoverable. But Ava wasn't just another malfunctioning machine. There was something different about her. He could see it in the way her circuits intertwined with organic tissues, as if she wasn't purely cybernetic. A faint sound startled him. He turned to see Ava's fingers twitching. Her head tilted slightly, her glowing eyes flickering to life once again. "It's still there," she said softly, her voice mechanical yet filled with something else. "Fear. What's still there?" Alaric asked, stepping closer. Ava struggled to form the words. "The shadow. In my mind. It's watching me." Her voice faltered, and her hand moved to her temple, as if trying to claw something out. Alaric grabbed her hand gently, stopping her. "Hey, don't do that. You'll damage yourself even more." Her glowing eyes met his, and for a moment, the fear in them seemed almost human. "You don't understand," she said. "They didn't just destroy my memories. They left something behind. Something that doesn't belong." Her words sent a chill down Alaric's spine. He had heard of advanced AI systems being implanted with fail-safes or trackers, but this sounded more insidious. He turned back to his console, typing furiously. He needed to dig deeper, even if it meant risking triggering whatever was hidden in her mind. Accessing encrypted files. Warning. Unauthorized access detected. A red alert flashed on his screen. The moment he tried to bypass the encryption, Ava let out a sharp cry, clutching her head. Sparks flew from the base of her neck, and her body convulsed, as if she were being electrocuted. "Stop," she shouted, her voice cracking. "You're waking it up." Alaric quickly cut the power to her neural link. Ava's body went limp, her breathing shallow. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with frustration and guilt. "But if I don't figure out what's inside your head, I can't help you." Ava didn't respond immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, almost defeated. "You can't help me. No one can. They made sure of that." Alaric's brow furrowed. "Who's they?" he asked. Ava hesitated, as if fighting through the fog of her fragmented memories. I don't know," she admitted. "But I remember a name. Eidolon Protocol. It was everywhere, in my mind, in my systems. It was all I heard before. Everything went dark." The name sent a ripple of unease through Alaric. He had heard whispers of the Eidolon Protocol in underground circles, an experimental project rumored to involve neural reprogramming and mass control. But those were just stories, urban legends of the cybernetic age. Could Ava be tied to something that dangerous? As he pondered, his console beeped, pulling his attention back. The diagnostic scan had completed, revealing more than he expected. Among the corrupted files, a single fragment had been recovered. It wasn't much, just a few seconds of video, but it might hold answers. Alaric played the file. The screen lit up with grainy footage of a high-tech lab. Figures in lab coats moved around, their faces obscured by masks. In the center of the frame was Ava, restrained in a chair, wires snaking from her head to a massive machine behind her. Her face was calm, almost serene, but her eyes betrayed her terror. Subject Ava 7, a voice said, cold and clinical. Initiating final memory wipe and integration with the Eidolon protocol. Subject will no longer retain independent thought. The screen froze, the file ending abruptly. Alaric stared at the image, his hands clenched into fists. Whoever these people were, they had treated Ava like a tool, stripping her of her identity and reducing her to a vessel for their experiments. But something had gone wrong. Ava's fractured mind, her fragmented memories, they were proof that she had resisted. Somehow, she had broken free before they could complete their work. And now, whatever they had left behind was still inside her, waiting. "You're not just broken," Alaric said, turning to Ava. "You're a survivor." Ava's eyes flickered, her expression softening. "Surviving isn't enough," she said quietly. "I don't want to live like this. Half of me missing, the other half haunted." Alaric knelt beside her, his voice firm. "Then we'll fix it. All of it. But I need you to trust me." For a moment, Ava didn't respond. Then slowly she nodded. "Okay," she said, "but you need to be careful. Whatever's inside me, it's not just data. It's alive." Alaric didn't know what she meant, but he knew one thing. This wasn't going to be a simple repair job. Ava's shattered mind held secrets far beyond anything he had ever encountered, and if he wasn't careful, those secrets could destroy them both. The impossible solution. The hum of the diagnostic machine filled the air as Dr. Alaric leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. The more he uncovered about Ava's neural architecture, the clearer it became that he was dealing with something far beyond his understanding. Her brain was a masterpiece of both organic and synthetic engineering. But it wasn't just damage. It was deliberately sabotage. He reached for his cup of stale coffee, pausing when he noticed a faint blue glow reflecting off the liquid. Turning toward the workbench, he saw Ava's eyes glowing faintly, tracking his every movement. "You're thinking about giving up," she said, her voice steady but edged with tension. Alaric frowned. "No, I'm thinking about how to solve this without breaking you further." Ava shifted slightly on the bench, her damaged joints creaking in protest. "I'm already broken. You can't fix what's gone." He set the cup down, standing and crossing his arms. "Don't tell me what I can't do. If you were beyond repair, you wouldn't still be talking." Ava's eyes dimmed for a moment, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. "Optimistic, aren't you? That's rare in your line of work." Alaric didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to his console and pulled up the fragmented data he'd managed to recover. Among the corrupted files, one section stood out, a cluster of heavily encrypted code labeled Core Directive. Immutable. Every attempt to access it had triggered a defensive response, causing Ava intense pain. "If I can't break the encryption, I need another way to bypass it," he murmured to himself. His gaze drifted to a dusty shelf where an old neural interface helmet rested. It was an outdated piece of technology, but it had one advantage. It allowed direct interaction with cybernetic systems, bypassing firewalls entirely. "Are you seriously considering that?" Ava asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "You know what happens if you connect to me directly. My system will treat you like an intruder." "It's a risk I'll have to take," Alaric replied. "Your mind isn't just encrypted, it's fighting back. If I can sync with your neural core, I might be able to stabilize it from the inside." Ava's eyes narrowed. "Or it might kill you." "I don't exactly have a reputation for being user-friendly right now." Alaric smirked. Good thing I've always been bad at listening to warnings. The procedure begins. Hours later, the lab was a flurry of activity. Alaric had cleared a space, setting up a direct link between the neural interface helmet and Ava's core systems. The helmet felt heavier than he remembered as he adjusted it over his head. Its design was clunky compared to Ava's sleek technology, a relic of a simpler time. Ava watched him intently. If this goes wrong, you might end up like me, half-functioning and haunted. Alaric gave her a reassuring glance. I'll take my chances. Ready? Ready as I'll ever be, she replied, her voice softer than usual. With a deep breath, Alaric activated the link. A sharp jolt shot through his body as his consciousness was pulled into Ava's neural network. The physical world faded, replaced by a surreal landscape of light and shadow. Inside the mind, the interior of Ava's mind was unlike anything Alaric had imagined. Streams of data flowed like rivers, glowing with an eerie, pulsating light. Fragments of memories hung suspended in the air, images of a life half-remembered. He saw glimpses of Ava's past, a crowded marketplace, a man handing her a small object, a flash of light, and then darkness. Before he could process the images, a deep, resonating voice echoed through the space. Intruder detected. Alaric spun around, his heart racing. A towering figure loomed before him, formed entirely of black and red code. Its form shifted constantly, a chaotic mix of jagged edges and flowing streams. What are you? Alaric demanded, his voice echoing. The entity didn't answer. Instead, it lunged toward him, tendrils of corrupted code reaching out like claws. Alaric barely dodged, his movements clumsy in the unfamiliar environment. This is the shadow she was talking about, he muttered. Some kind of failsafe. The entity struck again, faster this time. Alaric stumbled, narrowly avoiding its grasp. He realized that fighting it was pointless. It wasn't just protecting Ava's mind. It was part of her mind. To destroy it would be to destroy her. A new approach. Dodging another attack, Alaric focused on the streams of data flowing around him. He noticed that some pathways were brighter, more stable, while others flickered and faded. If he could reroute the corrupted pathways, he might weaken the entity without damaging Ava's core systems. Let's see how smart you really are, he muttered, reaching out to one of the stable streams. His hands glowed faintly as he manipulated the data, redirecting its flow. The effect was immediate. The entity recoiled, its form flickering. Unauthorized action. Cease immediately. Sorry, can't do that, Alaric said, continuing to work. He moved quickly, redirecting more streams and stabilizing damaged pathways. Each adjustment caused the entity to weaken, its attacks growing slower and less coordinated. Finally, with one last adjustment, the entity froze, its form dissolving into fragments of harmless code. The space around Alaric brightened, the rivers of data flowing smoothly once more. Awakening. Alaric gasped as he returned to the physical world, his body drenched in sweat. He ripped off the helmet, blinking against the harsh light of the lab. Ava was sitting upright on the workbench, her eyes glowing steadily. You did it, she said, her voice filled with awe. Barely, Alaric replied, his voice hoarse. Your mind is stable, for now, but there's still a lot of work to do. Ava's expression softened. Thank you. I didn't think anyone would risk this much for me. Alaric gave her a small smile. Let's just say I'm not a fan of giving up. As they sat in the quiet of the lab, both of them knew that the battle was far from over. But for the first time, Ava felt a flicker of hope, a feeling she hadn't known in a long time. Memories of betrayal. Ava sat on the workbench, her legs swinging idly as Alaric paced the lab, muttering to himself. The earlier procedure had stabilized her neural core, but it hadn't answered the most pressing question: who had done this to her, and why? As Alaric tinkered with the diagnostic interface, Ava stared at the faint glow of her hands. For the first time in what felt like eternity, She didn't feel the sharp pain of corrupted data slicing through her mind. But something else lingered, a deep, gnawing sense of unease. "Alaric," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the mechanical hum of the lab. "I'm remembering things." He stopped mid-step, turning to face her. "What kind of things?" Ava's glowing eyes flickered as she searched for the right words. "It's fragmented, like pieces of a shattered mirror. Faces I don't recognize, voices saying my name. And one word that keeps repeating." Alaric moved closer, intrigued. "What word?" Her gaze fixed on him, unblinking. "Obsidian." The word sent a chill down Alaric's spine. "Obsidian," he repeated, his mind racing. "That's not just a word, it's a name. A powerful corporation, rumored to be behind some of the most advanced cybernetics in the galaxy." Ava nodded slowly. "I think they made me. Or remade me." The hidden files. Alaric sat down at his console, typing furiously as he dug into the encrypted sections of Ava's neural core. Now that her mind was more stable, he hoped to uncover additional fragments of her memory. Lines of code streamed across the screen, interspersed with corrupted data and occasional flashes of coherent information. "There," Alaric muttered, isolating a cluster of recovered files. He accessed the first one, and a holographic projection filled the room. It was a recording, grainy and disjointed but still clear enough to make out. Ava stood in a pristine lab, her appearance far more polished than it was now. Her silver plating gleamed under bright lights, and her eyes glowed steadily. A man in a tailored suit circled her, his face obscured by shadows. "You're perfect," the man said, his voice smooth and cold. "Our masterpiece, the pinnacle of human and machine." Ava in the recording remained silent, her expression unreadable. The man continued, his tone softening. "But perfection isn't enough, Ava. We need loyalty. Absolute loyalty." The recording froze, the image distorting into static. Alaric's fingers flew over the keyboard, trying to restore the rest of the file. "Come on," he muttered. "There has to be more." Another fragment played, this one more chaotic. Ava was strapped to a table, her eyes wide with fear as the same man stood over her. "You think you're special," he sneered. "You're just another experiment. And experiments can be erased." The static returned, cutting off the recording. Alaric leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. "They tried to wipe you," he said, his voice heavy. "But you fought back." Ava's revelation. Ava's hands clenched into fists, her expression dark. "I remember now," she said, her voice trembling. "Obsidian created me as a weapon. They programmed me to obey, to follow their orders without question. But something went wrong. I started to think for myself. I started to feel." Alaric watched her carefully, his heart aching for the pain in her voice. "That's why they tried to destroy you," he said. "You became a threat to them." Ava nodded. "They didn't just want to erase my memories. They wanted to replace them, to make me their puppet again. But when they couldn't finish the job, they left me broken." Her eyes met Alaric's, and he saw something new in them, determination. "I don't just want to be fixed," she said. "I want to fight back." The betrayal. Alaric hesitated. "Ava, going after Obsidian is dangerous. They have resources, connections, things you can't even imagine." "Then why do I remember a face?" Ava shot back, her voice rising. "Why do I see someone looking at me, not with hatred, but with guilt?" Alaric's brow furrowed. "Guilt? Who?" Ava's glowing eyes flickered as she searched her fragmented memories. "A woman," she said slowly. "She was there when they strapped me to that table. She didn't stop them, but she didn't want to be there. I could feel it." The mention of the woman triggered something in the recovered data. Alaric's console beeped, revealing another fragment of information. A name. Dr. Ilara Voss. "Dr. Voss," Alaric read aloud. "She's one of Obsidian's top scientists. If she felt guilty, maybe she didn't agree with what they were doing. Ava stood, her movements more fluid than before. Then she's the key. If anyone knows how to finish what they started, or undo it, it's her. The hunter becomes the hunted. As Alaric and Ava planned their next move, a warning light flashed on the console. Alaric's stomach sank. "We've got company," he said, checking the security feed. The screen showed a group of heavily armed agents in sleek black armor approaching the workshop. Their movements were precise, coordinated, elite operatives. "They found us," Ava said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. Alaric grabbed a plasma wrench, his mind racing. "We need to get out of here." "No," Ava said firmly. "We fight." "Ava, there are too many of them." She stepped forward, her glowing eyes blazing brighter than ever. "They took everything from me, Alaric. I won't let them take you too." Cliffhanger ending. As the agents closed in, Ava stood at the door, her silver plating gleaming in the dim light. Her voice was calm, but her words carried a weight that sent shivers down Alaric's spine. "They wanted a weapon," she said. "Now they'll see what happens when it fights back." The screen cut to black, leaving only the sound of her footsteps and the hum of charging energy. The unimaginable connection. The lab trembled under the heavy boots of Obsidian's agents, their approach measured and relentless. Alaric could hear the distant hum of their weapons powering up, the sound like a wasp's buzz in the air. He turned to Ava, who stood in the middle of the room, her posture steady, her eyes glowing with a fierce light he hadn't seen before. "You can't fight them alone," Alaric said, gripping a small plasma cutter like a makeshift weapon. Ava didn't look at him. "I'm not fighting alone. You're going to help me." "Help you? With what?" "These are trained operatives, and I'm just an engineer." Alaric shot back, his voice rising. "Even with your systems stabilized, you're still not at full strength." Ava finally turned her head, her gaze locking onto his. "You said you wanted to fix me. Now's your chance. I don't just need repairs. I need an upgrade." A desperate gamble. Ava stepped closer, her voice steady despite the urgency. "In my core, there's something Obsidian didn't erase. A protocol they were too afraid to use. It's locked behind layers of encryption, but if you can unlock it, I'll have the power to take them on." Alaric's mind raced. "And what happens if it's another trap? What if activating it destroys you?" Ava smirked faintly. "I'd rather go out fighting than spend another second as their broken experiment." Alaric hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He glanced at the console, then back at Ava. "If we do this, there's no turning back." "There was no turning back the moment you found me," Ava replied. "Do it." Unlocking the protocol. Alaric worked quickly, his hands flying over the console as he bypassed layer after layer of encryption. Each time he made progress, the system fought back, sending sparks flying from Ava's neural interface. She flinched but didn't cry out, her focus unwavering. As he reached the final layer, a warning flashed on the screen. "Activation of Protocol Obsidian Prime is irreversible. Proceed." "This is it," Alaric said, his finger hovering over the confirmation button. "Are you sure?" Ava's voice was calm, resolute. "Do it." Alaric pressed the button. The lad was immediately bathed in a blinding white light as Ava's body arched off the workbench. Streams of data coursed through her, visible as glowing lines beneath her silver plating. The hum of energy grew louder, almost deafening, as her systems adapted to the sudden influx of power. Finally, the light faded, leaving Ava standing taller than before. Her movements were fluid, almost graceful, and her eyes now glowed with a golden hue. She flexed her fingers, the faint hum of energy radiating from her hands. "How do you feel?" Alaric asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ava turned to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Like I'm alive. The attack begins." Before they could say another word, the lab door exploded inward, sending shards of metal flying. Obsidian's agents stormed in, their weapons trained on Ava and Alaric. The leader, a towering figure in black armor, stepped forward. "Subject Ava 7, he said, his voice cold and mechanical through his helmet. "Stand down and return with us, or we will terminate you and your accomplice." Ava didn't flinch. She stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. "You came to take me back. You should have brought more men." The agent raised his weapon, but Ava moved faster than Alaric thought possible. In a blur of motion, she disarmed him, her hand crushing the weapon like it was made of paper. She spun, delivering a kick that sent the agent flying into the wall. The other operatives opened fire, but Ava's enhanced reflexes allowed her to dodge with ease. She moved like a force of nature, dismantling the team one by one with precision strikes. Sparks and shouts filled the room as the agents fell, their advanced armor no match for Ava's newfound strength. Ava's power revealed. As the last operative hit the ground, Ava stood in the center of the wreckage, her golden eyes scanning the room for any remaining threats. Alaric stared at her, his mouth slightly open. She was a different person, or machine, than the one he had found in the alley. She was powerful, controlled, and terrifyingly efficient. "That was incredible," Alaric managed to say, his voice filled with equal parts awe and fear. Ava turned to him, her expression unreadable. "This is what they were afraid of," she said quietly. "This is why they tried to erase me." Before Alaric could respond, a voice crackled through the helmet of one of the downed operatives. "Team 3, report. Status update." Ava picked up the helmet, her expression hardening. "They'll send more," she said, "and they'll keep coming until one of us is destroyed." Alaric ran a hand through his hair, his mind spinning. "We can't keep fighting them off like this. We need to go after them, hit them where it hurts." Ava's lips curved into a dangerous smile. "I was hoping you'd say that." The unimaginable connection. As they prepared to leave, Alaric noticed something strange on his console. Among the recovered files, a new piece of data had emerged, triggered by the activation of Ava's protocol. It wasn't a memory or a directive. It was a personal log. He opened it, and a familiar face appeared on the screen. Dr. Ilara Voss. Her expression was conflicted, her voice trembling as she spoke. "If you're hearing this, it means Ava has activated the Obsidian Prime Protocol. I'm sorry. I didn't want this for you, Ava. I tried to protect you, but they wouldn't listen. They turned you into a weapon, but you're more than that. You're my daughter." The recording ended abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. Alaric turned to Ava, whose expression was frozen in shock. "Your daughter," Alaric repeated, his voice barely audible. "Ava, you were human." Ava's hands clenched into fists, her golden eyes burning brighter. "Then it's time to remember who I was. And it's time to make them pay." The final upgrade. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Alaric leaned back against his console, trying to process what they had just uncovered. Ava, the seemingly flawless fusion of human and machine, had been human once, a daughter transformed into an experiment. Her glowing golden eyes betrayed no emotion, but her fists, clenched tightly at her sides, told another story. "Ava, are you okay?" Alaric asked cautiously. Her voice, when it came, was calm but steely. "I thought I was just a machine, a project. But they took more from me than my memories. They took me." Alaric hesitated before stepping forward. "If you want answers, if you want justice, we're going to need to be ready. Obsidian isn't going to stop. And right now, we're only 2 people against an entire corporation." Ava turned to him, her expression resolute. "Then let's even the odds. A plan for revolution." The workshop transformed into a hive of activity as Alaric and Ava prepared for their next move. Alaric rummaged through crates of old equipment, pulling out salvaged components and experimental devices he had abandoned long ago. "We can't just storm their headquarters," Alaric explained, laying out a blueprint of the city's corporate sector. "It's a fortress, and their tech is years ahead of anything we have. But if we can disrupt their systems, we'll have a chance. Ava studied the map, her enhanced mind processing the data faster than Alaric could speak. Their central power grid feeds directly into their security systems, she pointed out, tracing a line on the blueprint. If we can overload it, we'll cut off their surveillance and containment protocols. Exactly, Alaric said, nodding. But to do that, we need access to their mainframe. It's locked behind layers of encryption and physically guarded by their elite forces. Ava's lips curved into a faint smile. That's where I come in. The risk of upgrading. As they planned, Alaric hesitated, his gaze falling on a small, sealed compartment beneath his workbench. Inside was a prototype device he had designed years ago, a neural amplifier capable of enhancing a cybernetic being's processing power exponentially. It had never been tested, and its potential side effects were unknown. This might give you the edge you need, Alaric said, placing the device on the table. But it's dangerous. Your systems are already running at maximum capacity after activating the Obsidian Prime protocol. If we push you further, I could burn out. Ava finished for him. She picked up the device, examining it. But if it works, I'll have the power to take down their mainframe in seconds. Alaric nodded reluctantly. It's a one-way ticket. Once I install this, you'll either break through their defenses or break yourself. Ava set the device down, her golden eyes meeting Alaric's. Do it. If this is the only way to finish what they started, I'll take the risk. Installation and transformation. The procedure to install the amplifier was delicate and grueling. Alaric worked with steady hands, carefully integrating the device into Ava's neural core. Sparks flew as he connected the final wire, and Ava's body convulsed briefly before falling still. Ava, Alaric called out, panic creeping into his voice. Her eyes snapped open, brighter than before, their glow now shifting in complex patterns. I'm here, she said, her voice layered with a faint harmonic undertone. I can feel everything. The systems in this city, they're like open doors. Alaric exhaled in relief, but his concern remained. How do you feel? Stronger, Ava replied, flexing her fingers. But there's something else. Memories. Fragments I didn't have before. What kind of fragments? Alaric asked, his curiosity piqued. Ava tilted her head, her eyes unfocused as she accessed the newly unlocked data. A lab. My mother, Dr. Voss. She didn't just create me. She tried to save me. She left clues. A backdoor into their system. Alaric leaned forward, his excitement building. A backdoor. That could be our way in. Infiltration begins. Using the information Ava had uncovered, they located an old maintenance tunnel that led directly to Obsidian's power grid. The tunnel was abandoned, its walls lined with decaying wires and rusted panels. As they moved through the dimly lit space, Ava's enhanced sensors picked up faint traces of activity. They know we're coming, she said, her voice steady. They always do, Alaric muttered, gripping his plasma cutter tightly. At the end of the tunnel, a heavily fortified door blocked their path. Ava stepped forward, her hands glowing with energy. Let me handle this. She placed her palms against the metal, and within seconds, the door began to melt, the alloy disintegrating under her touch. Alaric watched in awe as she stepped through the opening, her movements precise and deliberate. The showdown. Inside the power grid's control center, Obsidian's operatives were waiting. A dozen heavily armed agents formed a defensive line, their weapons trained on Ava and Alaric. At the center of the room stood a figure Alaric immediately recognized from the recovered files, Dr. Ilara Voss. Stop right there, one of the agents commanded, his voice amplified by his helmet. You're outnumbered. Surrender, or we'll open fire. Ava ignored him, her glowing eyes fixed on Dr. Voss. You knew I'd come, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Dr. Voss stepped forward, her expression unreadable. I knew you'd survive, she said, but I didn't expect you to come this far. Why did you do this to me? Ava demanded, her voice trembling. "Why did you turn me into this?" Dr. Voss hesitated, guilt flickering across her face. "Because I didn't have a choice. They were going to kill you, Ava. I thought I could save you, give you a chance to live, even if it wasn't the life you wanted." Ava's hands clenched, energy rippling through her body. "And now I'm here to finish what you couldn't." The power overload. As the agents raised their weapons, Ava unleashed a pulse of energy that short-circuited their systems, sending them sprawling to the ground. She turned to the control panel at the center of the room, her hands glowing as she accessed the power grid. "Once I overload this system, their entire network will go down," Ava said, her voice calm. Alaric placed a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone. Let me help." Ava glanced at him, a faint smile on her lips. "You already have." As the power surged, Ava's body began to tremble, the strain of the amplifier pushing her to the brink. Alaric watched helplessly as she poured every ounce of her strength into the system, her glow intensifying until the room was bathed in blinding light. Cliffhanger ending. When the light faded, Ava was on the ground, her body motionless. The control panel was dark, the power grid completely offline. Alaric rushed to her side, his heart pounding. "Ava," he shouted, shaking her gently. "Stay with me." Her eyes flickered weakly, and she managed a faint smile. "It's done," she whispered. "They're blind now." As Alaric cradled her in his arms, the sound of approaching reinforcements echoed in the distance. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, they had a chance. A mind restored, a new threat. The silence in the control room was deafening after the power grid collapsed. Sparks flickered from the darkened terminals, casting fleeting shadows over the wreckage. Alaric knelt beside Ava, his hands trembling as he cradled her motionless body. Her golden eyes were dim, flickering faintly like dying embers. "Ava," he whispered, shaking her gently. "You're not done yet. Stay with me." Her eyes flickered open for a moment, her voice faint but clear. "We did it, didn't we?" "You did," Alaric said, his voice cracking. "You shut them down, but you pushed yourself too far." She managed a weak smile. Better to burn out saving something than live as their puppet. Her body jerked suddenly, sparks flying from the base of her neck. Alaric's heart sank as he realized the strain of the amplifier and the Obsidian Prime protocol was destabilizing her core systems. If he didn't act fast, he'd lose her forever. "I can't lose you now," he said, his jaw tightening. He gently lowered her to the floor, his mind racing. "If your systems are shutting down, I'll rebuild them. I've done it before. I'll do it again." A desperate repair. Alaric quickly accessed his portable diagnostic console, connecting it to Ava's neural core. The data streaming across the screen was chaotic. Her systems were failing faster than he could stabilize them. He ran his fingers through his hair, muttering under his breath. "Think, Alaric. Think." His gaze fell on the remnants of the control room's servers. Despite the overload, some components remained intact, including a storage drive containing Obsidian's primary system framework. A bold, dangerous idea formed in his mind. "What if," he whispered, hesitating, "what if I use their technology to fix her?" Ava stirred weakly, her voice barely audible. "What are you planning?" Alaric knelt beside her, brushing her hair away from her face. "I'm going to integrate their systems into yours. It's risky, but it might stabilize your core and restore the rest of your memories." Her eyes flickered faintly. "You're insane." "Maybe," he admitted. "But if it works, you'll be stronger than ever, and you'll know everything." The final connection. Working with a speed born of desperation, Alaric dismantled the server, salvaging its core components. He carefully connected them to Ava's neural interface, his hands moving with precision despite the tension coiling in his chest. Each connection sent a spark through her body, causing her to twitch and groan in pain. "I'm sorry, Ava," he murmured. "Just a little longer." As he initiated the integration process, the room filled with a low hum, growing louder with every passing second. The data streams in Ava's neural core began to stabilize, merging with the new framework. Alaric watched the screen intently, his breath catching as a notification appeared. Integration successful. Ava's body went still, her eyes closed. For a moment, Alaric feared the worst. Then her golden eyes snapped open, blazing with an intensity that filled the room with light. She sat up slowly, her movements fluid and deliberate. When she looked at Alaric, there was something different in her gaze, something deeper, more aware. "Ava?" he asked cautiously. She nodded, her voice steadier than ever. "It's me. All of me." Ava's restored memories. As Ava stood, memories flooded her mind, clear and vivid, like pieces of a puzzle finally falling into place. She saw herself as a child, running through a sunlit garden. She remembered her mother, Dr. Ilara Voss, holding her hand and telling her she was special. But the memories didn't stop there. She saw the experiments, the endless days spent in the cold, sterile lab. She saw her mother's face, torn with guilt as she activated the protocols that transformed her into a weapon. And she saw the faces of those who had ordered it all. Obsidian's board of directors, their cold smiles as they signed away her humanity. Ava turned to Alaric, her expression unreadable. "I remember everything," she said quietly. "Who I was, what they did to me, and who's responsible." "What are you going to do?" Alaric asked, his voice hesitant. Ava's golden eyes burned with resolve. "I'm going to finish this. The final confrontation." Using the information stored in her restored memories, Ava and Alaric made their way to Obsidian's main headquarters, a towering fortress of glass and steel at the heart of the city. With the power grid down, security was weakened, but the building was still guarded by automated defenses and elite operatives. Ava led the way, her movements swift and purposeful. The defenses that once posed a threat now seemed almost trivial as she hacked into their systems with ease, disabling turrets and locking down security patrols. As they ascended to the top floor, the air grew colder, charged with tension. They entered the boardroom, where Obsidian's directors waited, their faces masks of calm arrogance. "You've caused quite a mess, Ava," one of them said, his tone condescending. "But it's over. You belong to us." Ava stepped forward, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. "I don't belong to anyone." Justice and freedom. What followed was swift and decisive. Ava used her enhanced abilities to disable the director's escape routes and expose their crimes to the world, broadcasting the evidence of their experiments and corruption across the city. The building shook as alarms blared, but Ava remained steady, her purpose unwavering. When it was over, she stood in the center of the room, the directors subdued and powerless. She turned to Alaric, who had watched the entire scene in awe. "It's done," she said simply. Alaric nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "You did it. A new beginning." As they walked out of the building, the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, casting the city in a golden light. Ava paused, looking up at the sky. "What now?" Alaric asked. She turned to him, her expression soft but determined. "Now I figure out who I want to be. Not as their experiment, not as their weapon, just me." "And where do I fit into that?" Alaric asked with a smirk. Ava smiled. "I think you've earned a place." Together, they disappeared into the city, leaving the ruins of Obsidian's empire behind. But in Ava's heart, a fire burned brighter than ever, a fire fueled by hope, justice, and the promise of a future she would shape herself.